So, a lot of Pākehā find talk of the treaty triggering. Why aren't you threatened by it?
I don't think threaten's a really helpful idea. I mean, you've really got to work out, firstly, who you are and where you come from to make sense of things that are happening around you. In law, I came back to teach at the university when the He Taua incident happened at the university with the Haka Party. It followed the Bastion Point occupation and evictions. There were the Waitangi protests. There was the Springbok tour. And the law was at the centre of it. So you couldn't do law without understanding the relationship between Te Tiriti and law because it was happening all around you.
But I remember when I first met you, I was at law school and there were no conversations really about the treaty and constitutional law. I think I asked a question and they said, well, if it's not embedded in legislation, then we don't really deal with it. So did that change in your tenure, throughout your tenure?
Yeah, I think it was a part of a moment, a really important moment in the history of Aotearoa because we'd had the 70s and the 80s full of protests. We have to remember that it was the protest movements that actually put on the front page the issues that should have been discussed for decades and a century and a half. And so it was a time which forced you to confront those realities.
Now, you have long been an ally and a champion and worked alongside some of our most formidable and articulate activists, I guess. How do you navigate those relationships so you don't get offside with them and you stay in your lane? Because some Pākehā are worried about that. They want to join in, but, a bit anxious.
Well, I mean, you screw up. You make mistakes, you learn from mistakes. Hopefully over time you build enough trust in you that when you screw up you are given that chance to learn and do things better. But I think there's a couple of really important challenges. One is to remember what your role is. The role of Pākehā in the treaty context is firstly to empower Māori. It's not to speak for Māori. It's to know where the boundaries are. And if there's an Indigenous to Indigenous kōrero, then that's not a place for you. At the same time, it's working out how to talk truth to your own power. And that includes challenging the Crown, bringing your voice to challenge those who purport to speak for you when they don't.
So over the years, the conversation around the treaty has changed a lot. I remember a time when it was the treaty is a fraud, then it went to honour the treaty. Now there's a lot of conversation around the interpretations of various texts and the principles. What are the challenges that those present to us?
The starting point has to be understanding what Māori expected when they entered into that covenant to allow Queen Victoria to bring some of her own people here. And that was to continue as they were with the benefits of those who came. And we have to keep that in mind because it's a win-win.
So for those of us who understand what the treaty is about and why it's good for everybody, the big challenge is the how.
I think the how differs depending on what you bring to the challenge. So those of us who are lawyers have certain skills that we can bring. Those who work in communities can work in those communities, whether it's through social projects or working with the marae or the kura or their own school to introduce biculturalism and deal with history and so on. So I think we need to think about what our particular responsibilities and contributions can be. We're doing some projects at the moment that involve a treaty audit of various things that are being done, not trusting the Crown to do the audit.
Because they often audit themselves about the breaches that they've committed, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, they do, and they compound the breaches because they reinterpret their treaty obligations in ways that retains their power. For us as Pākehā, there are enormous pluses and benefits for us to understand te ao Māori and to find ways to work with Māori to advance Aotearoa. And so that is the message and the challenge to next generations.